Section 3. Money. The commodity that functions as a measure of value, and, either in its own person or by a representative, as the medium of circulation, is money. Gold, or silver, is therefore money. It functions as money on the one hand when it has to be present in its own golden person. I like that. It is then the money commodity, neither merely ideal as in its function as a measure of value, nor capable of being represented as in its function of circulating medium. On the other hand, it also functions as money, when by virtue of its function, whether that function be performed in person or by representative, it congeals into the sole form of value, the only adequate form of existence of exchange value, in opposition to use value, represented by all other commodities. A. Hoarding. The continual movement in circuits of the two antithetical metamorphoses of commodities, or the never-ceasing alternation of sale and purchase, is reflected in the restless currency of money, or in the function that money performs of a perpetuum mobile of circulation. But so soon as the series of metamorphoses is interrupted, so soon as sales are not supplemented by subsequent purchases, money ceases to be mobilized. It is transformed, as Bois-Guilbert says, from movable into immovable, from coin into money. With the very early development of the circulation of commodities, there is also developed the necessity and the passionate desire to hold fast the product of the first metamorphosis, which, remember, in the commodity circuit is C to M. So Marx is saying that after that sale, people are trying to hold on to their money. This product is the transformed shape of the commodity, or its gold chrysalis. Footnote here, quoting Mercier de la Rivière, monetary wealth is nothing but wealth in products transformed into money, and again, a value in the form of products which has merely changed its form. Back to the main text. Commodities are thus sold not for the purpose of buying others, but in order to replace their commodity form by their money form. From being the mere means of effecting the circulation of commodities, this change of form becomes the end and aim. The changed form of the commodity is thus prevented from functioning as its unconditionally alienable form, or as its merely transient money form. The money becomes petrified into a hoard, and the seller becomes a hoarder of money. In the early stages of the circulation of commodities, it is the surplus use values alone that are converted into money. Gold and silver thus become of themselves social expressions for superfluity or wealth. This naive form of hoarding becomes perpetuated in those commodities in which the traditional mode of production is carried on for the supply of a fixed and limited circle of home wants. It is thus with the people of Asia, and particularly of the East Indies. Vanderlyn, who fancies that the prices of commodities in a country are determined by the quantity of gold and silver to be found in it, asks himself why Indian commodities are so cheap. Answer: because the Hindus bury their money. From 1602 to 1734, he remarks, they buried 150 millions of pounds sterling of silver, which originally came from America to Europe. Footnote here, quoting Vanderlyn, "'Tis by this practice they keep all their goods and manufactures at such low rates." Back to the main text. In the 10 years from 1856 to 1866, England exported to India and China 120 million pounds in silver, which had been received in exchange for Australian gold. Most of the silver exported to China makes its way to India. As the production of commodities further develops, every producer of commodities is compelled to make sure of the nexus rerum, or the social pledge. Footnote here, quoting John Bellers in Essays about the Poor, Manufactures, Trade, Plantations, and Immorality, 1699, money is a pledge. Back to the main text. His wants are constantly making themselves felt, and necessitate the continual purchase of other people's commodities, while the production and sale of his own goods require time and depend upon circumstances. In order then to be able to buy without selling, he must have sold previously without buying. This operation, conducted on a general scale, appears to imply a contradiction, but the precious metals at the sources of their production are directly exchanged for other commodities, and here we have sales, by the owners of commodities, without purchases, by the owners of gold or silver. Footnote here, a purchase in a categorical sense implies that gold and silver are already the converted form of commodities or the product of a sale. Back to the main text. And subsequent sales by other producers, unfollowed by purchases, merely bring about the distribution of the newly produced precious metals among all the owners of commodities. In this way, all along the line of exchange, hoards of gold and silver of varied extent are accumulated. With the possibility of holding and storing up exchange value in the shape of a particular commodity arises also the greed for gold. along with the extension of circulation, increases the power of money, that absolutely social form of wealth ever ready for use. Quoting Columbus in his letter from Jamaica 1502, "Gold is a wonderful thing. Whoever possesses it is lord of all he wants. By means of gold one can even get souls into paradise." Unquote. Since gold does not disclose what has been transformed into it, everything, commodity or not, is convertible into gold. Everything becomes saleable and buyable. The circulation becomes the great social retort into which everything is thrown, to come out again as a gold crystal. Not even are the bones of saints, and still less are more delicate res sacrosancti, extra commercium hominum, able to withstand this alchemy. Footnote here, Henry III, most Christian king of France, robbed cloisters of their relics and turned them into money. It is well known what part the despoiling of the Delphic temple by the Phocians played in the history of Greece. Temples with the ancients served as the dwellings of the gods of commodities. They were sacred banks. With the Phoenicians, a trading people par excellence, money was the transmuted shape of everything. It was therefore quite in order that the virgins who, at the feast of the goddess of love, gave themselves up to strangers, should offer to the goddess the piece of money they received. Back to the main text. Just as every qualitative difference between commodities is extinguished in money, so money on its side, like the radical leveler that it is, does away with all distinctions. Footnote here quoting Shakespeare, "Gold, yellow, glittering, precious gold. Thus much of this will make black white, foul fair, wrong right, base noble, old young, coward valiant. What this, you gods? Why, this will lug your priests and servants from your sides, pluck stout men's pillows from below their heads. This yellow slave will knit and break religions, bless the accursed, make the whore leprosy adored, place thieves and give them title, knee, and approbation, with senators on the bench. This is it that makes the wappened widow wed again. Come, damned earth, through common whore of mankind." Unquote. Back to the main text. But money itself is a commodity, an external object, capable of becoming the private property of any individual. Thus social power becomes the private power of private persons. The ancients therefore denounced money as subversive of the economic and moral order of things. Footnote here quoting Sophocles, "Money, nothing worse in our lives, so current, rampant, so corrupting. Money, you demolish cities, root men from their homes, you train and twist good minds and set them on to the most atrocious schemes. No limit, you make them adept at every kind of outrage, every godless crimes. Money." Back to the main text. Modern society, which soon after its birth pulled Plutus by the hair of his head from the bowels of the earth, greets gold as its holy grail, as the glittering incarnation of the very principle of its own life. Footnote here, quoting the Deipnosophists, the desire of avarice to draw Pluto himself out of the bowels of the earth. Back to the main text. A commodity, in its capacity of a use value, satisfies a particular want, and is a particular element of material wealth. But the value of a commodity measures the degree of its attraction for all other elements of material wealth, and therefore measures the social wealth of its owner. To a barbarian owner of commodities, and even to a West European peasant, value is the same as value form, and therefore to him, the increase in his hoard of gold and silver is an increase in value. It is true that the value of money varies, at one time in consequence of a variation in its own value, at another in consequence of a change in the values of commodities. But this on the one hand does not prevent 200 ounces of gold from still containing more value than 100 ounces. Nor on the other hand does it hinder the actual metallic form of this article from continuing to be the universal equivalent form of all other commodities, and the immediate social incarnation of all human labor. The desire after hoarding is in its very nature unsatiable. In its qualitative aspect, or formally considered, money has no bounds to its efficacy, i.e., it is the universal representative of material wealth, because it is directly convertible into any other commodity. But at the same time, every actual sum of money is limited in amount, and therefore, as a means of purchasing, has only a limited efficacy. This antagonism between the quantitative limits of money and its qualitative boundlessness continually acts as a spur to the hoarder in their Sisyphus-like labor of accumulating. It is with them as it is with a conqueror who sees in every new country annexed only a new boundary. In order that gold may be held as money and made to form a hoard, it must be prevented from circulating, or from transforming itself into a means of enjoyment. The hoarder therefore makes a sacrifice of the lusts of the flesh to his gold fetish. He acts in earnest up to the gospel of abstention. On the other hand, he can withdraw from circulation no more than what he has thrown into it in the shape of commodities. The more he produces, the more he is able to sell. Hard work, Saving and avarice are, therefore, his three cardinal virtues, and to sell much and buy little, the sum of his political economy. Footnote here, quoting Very, these are the pivots around which all the measures of political economy turn: the maximum possible increase in the number of sellers of each commodity, and the maximum possible decrease in the number of buyers. Unquote, back to the main text. By the side of the gross form of a hoard, we find also its aesthetic form in the possession of gold and silver articles. This grows with the wealth of civil society. Quoting Diderot, let us be rich, or let us appear rich. Or, I'll add, quoting Jello Biafra, go broke appearing rich. Continuing, in this way there is created on the one hand, a constantly extending market for gold and silver, unconnected with their functions as money, and on the other hand, a latent source of supply, to which recourse is had principally in times of crisis and social disturbance. Hoarding serves various purposes in the economy of the metallic circulation. Its first function arises out of the conditions to which the currency of gold and silver coins is subject. We have seen how, along with the continual fluctuations in the extent and rapidity of the circulation of commodities and in their prices, the quantity of money current unceasingly ebbs and flows. This mass must, therefore, be capable of expansion and contraction. At one time, money must be attracted in order to act as circulating coin. At another, circulating coin must be repelled in order to act again as more or less stagnant money. In order that the mass of money, actually current, may constantly saturate the absorbing power of the circulation, it is necessary that the quantity of gold and silver in a country be greater than the quantity required to function as coin. This condition is fulfilled by money taking the form of hoards. These reserves serve as conduits for the supply or withdrawal of money to or from the circulation, which in this way never overflows its banks. Footnote here, quoting Sir D. North, there is required for carrying on the trade of the nation a determinate sum of specific money which varies, and is sometimes more, sometimes less, as the circumstances we are in require. This ebbing and flowing of money supplies and accommodates itself without any aid of politicians. The buckets work alternately. When money is scarce, bullion is coined. When bullion is scarce, money is melted. Unquote. John Stuart Mill, who for a long time was an official of the East India Company, confirms the fact that in India, silver ornaments still continue to perform directly the functions of a hoard. The silver ornaments are brought out and coined when there's a high rate of interest, and go back again when the rate of interest falls. According to a parliamentary document of 1864 on the gold and silver import and export of India, the import of gold and silver in 1863 exceeded the export by almost 20 million pounds. During the 8 years immediately preceding 1864, the excess of imports over exports of the precious metals amounted to almost 110 million pounds. During this century, far more than 200 million pounds has been coined in India. Back to the main text, and that's the end of subsection A. B. Means of payment. In the simple form of the circulation of commodities hitherto considered, we found a given value always presented to us in a double shape, as a commodity at one pole, as money at the opposite pole. The owners of commodities came, therefore, into contact as the respective representatives of what were already equivalents. But with the development of circulation, conditions arise under which the alienation of commodities becomes separated by an interval of time from the realization of their prices. It will be sufficient to indicate the most simple of these conditions. One sort of article requires a longer, another a shorter time for its production. Again, the production of different commodities depends on different seasons of the year. One sort of commodity may be born on its own marketplace, another has to make a long journey to market. Commodity owner number 1 may therefore be ready to sell before number 2 is ready to buy. When the same transactions are continually repeated between the same persons, the conditions of sale are regulated in accordance with the conditions of production. On the other hand, the use of a given commodity, of a house for instance, is sold, or in common parlance let, for a definite period. Here, it is only at the end of the term that the buyer has actually received the use value of the commodity. He therefore buys it before he pays for it. The vendor sells an existing commodity. The purchaser buys as the mere representative of money, or rather of future money. The vendor becomes a creditor. The purchaser becomes a debtor. Since the metamorphosis of commodities, or the development of their value form, appears here under a new aspect, money also acquires a fresh function. It becomes the means of payment. The character of creditor or of debtor results here from the simple circulation. The change in the form of that circulation stamps buyer and seller with this new die. At first, therefore, these new parts are just as transient and alternating as those of seller and buyer. and are in turns played by the same actors, but the opposition is not nearly so pleasant and is far more capable of crystallization. Footnote here, the following shows the debtor and creditor relations existing between English traders at the beginning of the 18th century. Quoting from an essay on credit and the Bankrupt Act, 1707, quote, "Such a spirit of crudity reigns here in England among the men of trade that is not to be met with in any other society of men, nor in any other kingdom of the world." Unquote, back to the main text. The same characters can, however, be assumed independently of the circulation of commodities. The class struggles of the ancient world took the form chiefly of a contest between debtors and creditors, which, in Rome, ended in the ruin of the plebeian debtors. They were displaced by slaves. In the Middle Ages, the contest ended with the ruin of the feudal debtors, who lost their political power together with the economic basis on which it was established. Nevertheless, the money relation of debtor and creditor that existed at these two periods reflected only the deeper lying antagonism between the general economic conditions of existence of the classes in question. Let us return to the circulation of commodities. The appearance of the two equivalents, commodities and money, at the two poles of the process of sale has ceased to be simultaneous. The money functions now first as a measure of value in the determination of the price of the commodity sold. The price fixed by the contract measures the obligation of the debtor, or the sum of money that they have to pay at a fixed date. Secondly, it serves as an ideal means of purchase. Although existing only in the promise of the buyer to pay, it causes the commodity to change hands. It is not before the day fixed for payment that the means of payment actually steps into circulation, leaves the hand of the buyer for that of the seller. The circulating medium was transformed into a hoard because the process stopped short after the first phase, because the converted shape of the commodity, viz. The money, was withdrawn from circulation. The means of payment enters the circulation, but only after the commodity has left it. The money is no longer the means that brings about this process. It only brings it to a close, by stepping in as the absolute form of existence of exchange value, or as the universal commodity. The seller turned his commodity into money, in order thereby to satisfy some want. The hoarder did the same in order to keep their commodity in its money shape, and the debtor in order to be able to pay. If they do not pay, their goods will be sold by the sheriff. The value form of commodities, money, is therefore now the end and aim of a sale, and that owing to a social necessity springing out of the process of circulation itself. The buyer converts money back into commodities before they have turned commodities into money. In other words, they achieve the second metamorphosis of commodities before the first. The seller's commodity circulates and realizes its price, but only in the shape of a legal claim upon money. It is converted into a use value before it has been converted into money. The completion of its first metamorphosis follows only at a later period. Footnote here, it will be seen from the following quotation from my book, which appeared in 1859, Contribution to a Critique of Political Economy, why I take no notice in the text of an opposite form. Quote, "Contrariwise, in the process M to C, the money can be alienated as a real means of purchase, and in that way, the price of the commodity can be realized before the use value of the money is realized and the commodity actually delivered. This occurs constantly under the everyday form of prepayments, and it is under this form that the English government purchases opium from the ryots of India. In these cases, however, the money always acts as a means of purchase. Of course, capital also is advanced in the shape of money. This point of view, however, does not fall within the horizon of simple circulation." Unquote, back to the main text. The obligations falling due within a given period represent the sum of the prices of the commodities, the sale of which gave rise to those obligations. The quantity of gold necessary to realize this sum depends in the first instance on the rapidity of currency of the means of payment. That quantity is conditioned by two circumstances. First, the relations between debtors and creditors form a sort of chain, in such a way that A, when they receive money from their debtor B, straightway hands it over to C, their creditor, and so on. The second circumstance is the length of the intervals between the different due days of the obligations. The continuous chain of payments, or retarded first metamorphoses, is essentially different from that interlacing of the series of metamorphoses which we considered on a former page. By the currency of the circulating medium, the connection between buyers and sellers is not merely expressed. This connection is originated by, and exists in, the circulation alone. Contrariwise, the movement of the means of payment expresses a social relation that was in existence long before. The fact that a number of sales take place simultaneously, and side by side, limits the extent to which coin can be replaced by the rapidity of currency. On the other hand, this fact is a new lever in economizing the means of payment. In proportion as payments are concentrated at one spot, special institutions and methods are developed for their liquidation. Such in the Middle Ages were the virements at Lyons. The debts due from A to B, from B to C from A, and so on, have only to be confronted with each other in order to annul each other to a certain extent, like positive and negative quantities. There thus remains only a single balance to pay. The greater the amount of the payments concentrated, the less is this balance relatively to that amount, and the less is the mass of the means of payment in circulation. The function of money as the means of payment implies a contradiction without a terminus medius. Insofar as the payments balance one another, money functions only ideally as money of account, as a measure of value. Insofar as actual payments have to be made, money does not serve as a circulating medium, as a mere transient agent in the interchange of products, but as the individual incarnation of social labor, as the independent form of existence of exchange value, as the universal commodity. This contradiction comes to a head in those phases of industrial and commercial crises, which are known as monetary crises. Footnote here, the monetary crisis referred to in the text, being a phase of every crisis, must be clearly distinguished from that particular form of crisis, which is also called a monetary crisis, but which may be produced by itself as an independent phenomenon in such a way as to react only indirectly on industry and commerce. The pivot of these crises is to be found in moneyed capital, and their sphere of direct action is therefore the sphere of that capital, viz., banking, the stock exchange, and finance. Back to the main text. Such a crisis occurs only where the ever-lengthening chain of payments and an artificial system of settling them has been fully developed. Whenever there is a general and extensive disturbance of this mechanism, no matter what its cause, money becomes suddenly and immediately transformed from its merely ideal shape of money of account into hard cash. Profane commodities can no longer replace it. The use value of commodities becomes valueless, and their value vanishes in the presence of its own independent form. On the eve of the crisis, the bourgeois, with the self-sufficiency that springs from intoxicating prosperity, declares money to be a vain imagination. Commodities alone are money. But now the cry is everywhere. Money alone is a commodity. As the heart pants after fresh water, so pants his soul after money, the only wealth. Footnote here, quoting Marx again. The sudden reversion from a system of credit to a system of hard cash heaps theoretical fright on top of the practical panic, and the dealers by whose agency circulation is effected shudder before the impenetrable mystery in which their own economic relations are involved. Unquote. And quoting John Bellers in Proposals for Raising a Cottage of Industry, 1696, the poor stand still because the rich have no money to employ them, though they have the same land and hands to provide victuals and clothes as they ever had, which is the true riches of a nation, and not the money. Unquote. Back to the main text. In a crisis, the antithesis between commodities and their value form, money, becomes heightened into an absolute contradiction. Hence, in such events, the form under which money appears is of no importance. The money famine continues, whether payments have to be made in gold or in credit money such as banknotes. Footnote here, the following shows how such times are exploited by the friends of commerce. Quoting from the Theory of Exchanges, the Bank Charter Act of 1864, on one occasion, 1839, an old grasping banker in the city in his private room raised the lid of the desk he sat over and displayed to a friend rolls of banknotes, saying with intense glee that there were 600,000 pounds of them. They were held to make money tight and would all be let out after 3 o'clock on the same day. Unquote. The Observer, a semi-official government organ, contained the following paragraph on the 24th of April, 1864, quote, "Some very curious rumors are current of the means which have been resorted to in order to create a scarcity of banknotes. Questionable as it would seem to suppose that any trick of the kind would be adopted, the report has been so universal that it really deserves mention." Unquote. Back to the main text. If we now consider the sum total of the money current during a given period, we shall find that, given the rapidity of currency of the circulating medium and of the means of payment, it is equal to the sum of the prices to be realized, plus the sum of the payments falling due, minus the payments that balance each other, minus finally the number of circuits in which the same piece of coin serves, in turn, as means of circulation and of payment. Hence, even when prices, rapidity of currency, and the extent of the economy and payments are given, the quantity of money current and the mass of commodities circulating during a given period, such as a day, no longer correspond. Money that represents commodities long withdrawn from circulation continues to be current. Commodities circulate, whose equivalent in money will not appear on the scene till some future day. Moreover, the debts contracted each day and the payments falling due on the same day are quite incommensurate quantities. Footnote here, quoting from the Currency Theory Reviewed in a letter to the Scottish people by a banker in England, 1845. The amount of purchases or contracts entered upon during the course of any given day will not affect the quantity of money afloat on that particular day, but in the vast majority of cases will resolve themselves into multifarious drafts upon the quantity of money which may be afloat at subsequent dates more or less distant. The bills granted or credits opened today need have no resemblance whatever, either in quantity, amount, or duration, to those granted or entered upon tomorrow or the next day. Nay, many of today's bills and credits when due fall in with a mass of liabilities whose origins traverse a range of antecedent dates altogether indefinite, bills at 12, 6, 3 months, or 1 often aggregating together to swell the common liabilities of one particular day. Back to the main text. Credit money springs directly out of the function of money as a means of payment. Certificates of the debts owing for the purchased commodities circulate for the purpose of transferring those debts to others. On the other hand, to the same extent as the system of credit is extended, so is the function of money as a means of payment. In that character, it takes various forms peculiar to itself, under which it makes itself at home in the sphere of great commercial transactions. Gold and silver coin, on the other hand, are mostly relegated to the sphere of retail trade. Footnote here, as an example of how little ready money is required in true commercial operations, I give below a statement by one of the largest London houses of its yearly receipts and payments. Its transactions during the year 1856, extending to many millions of pounds sterling, are here reduced to the scale of 1 million. So the statement has 2 columns, receipts and payments. The receipt side has 7 rows and the payment side has 5 rows. They both total 1 million pounds. The receipt side starts with bankers and merchants, and that's £533,596. The next one is checks on bankers, etc., payable on demand, which is £357,715, with the other 5 columns being much smaller amounts. And on the payment side, the largest is checks on London bankers, £663,672, with the second largest being bills payable after date, £302,674. Back to the main text. When the production of commodities has sufficiently extended itself, money begins to serve as the means of payment beyond the sphere of the circulation of commodities. It becomes the commodity that is the universal subject matter of all contracts. Footnote here, quoting from an essay upon public credit, 1710, the course of trade thus being turned from exchanging of goods for goods, or delivering and taking, to selling and paying, all the bargains are now stated upon the foot of a price in money. Back to the main text. Rents, taxes, and such like payments are transformed from payments in kind into money payments. To what extent this transformation depends upon the general conditions of production is shown, to take one example, by the fact that the Roman Empire twice failed in its attempt to levy all contributions in money. The unspeakable misery of the French agricultural population under Louis XIV, a misery so eloquently denounced by Bois-Guilbert, Marshal Vauban, and others, was due not only to the weight of the taxes, but also to the conversion of taxes in kind into money taxes. Footnote here, quoting Bois-Guilbert, money has become the executioner of all things. Finance is the alembic that evaporates a frightful quantity of goods and commodities in order to obtain this fatal extract. Money declares war on the whole human race. Back to the main text. In Asia, on the other hand, the fact that state taxes are chiefly composed of rents payable in kind depends on conditions of production that are reproduced with the regularity of natural phenomena. And this mode of payment tends in its turn to maintain the ancient form of production. It is one of the secrets of the conversion of the Ottoman Empire. If the foreign trade, forced upon Japan by Europeans, should lead to the substitution of money rents for rents in kind, it will be all up with the exemplary agriculture of that country. The narrow economic conditions under which that agriculture is carried on will be swept away. In every country, certain days of the year become by habit recognized settling days for various large and recurrent payments. These dates depend, apart from other revolutions in the wheel of reproduction, on conditions closely connected with the seasons. They also regulate the dates for payments that have no direct connection with the circulation of commodities, such as taxes, rents, and so on. The quantity of money requisite to make the payments, falling due on those dates all over the country, causes periodical, though merely superficial, perturbations in the economy of the medium of payment. Footnote here, citing John Fullerton's Regulation of Currencies, 1845, On Whitsuntide, 1824, says Mr. Craig before the Commons Committee of 1826, there was such an immense demand for notes upon the banks of Edinburgh that by 11 o'clock they had not a note left in their custody. They sent round to all the different banks to borrow, but could not get them, and many of the transactions were adjusted by slips of paper only. Yet by 3 o'clock, the whole of the notes were returned into the banks from which they had been issued. It was a mere transfer from hand to hand. Quote, although the average effective circulation of banknotes in Scotland is less than 3 millions sterling, yet on certain pay days in the year, every single note in the possession of the bankers, amounting in the whole to about £7,000,000, is called into activity. On these occasions, the notes have a single and specific function to perform, and so soon as they have performed it, they flow back into the various banks from which they issued. Marx adds, in explanation it should be stated that in Scotland, at the date of Fullerton's work, notes and not checks were used to withdraw deposits. Back to the main text. From the law of the rapidity of currency of the means of payment, it follows that the quantity of the means of payment required for all periodical payments, whatever their source, is in inverse proportion to the length of their periods. 2 footnotes here. The first is a note by the Institute of Marxism-Leninism in the Russian edition. The stating of inverse proportion is apparently a slip of the pen. When writing inverse, the author evidently meant direct proportion. Second footnote from Marx, to the question, if there were occasion to raise 40 millions per annum, whether the same 6 millions gold would suffice for such revolutions and circulations thereof as trade requires, Petty replies in his usual masterly manner, quote, I answer yes, for the expense being 40 millions, if the revolutions were in such short circles, viz. Weekly, as happens among poor artisans and laborers, who receive and pay every Saturday, then 40 out of 52 parts of 1 million of money would answer these ends. But if the circles be quarterly, according to our custom of paying rent and gathering taxes, then 10 millions were requisite. Wherefore, supposing payments in general to be of a mixed circle between 1 week and 13, then add 10 millions to 40 out of 52, the half of which will be 5.5, so as, if we have 5.5 millions, we have enough. Unquote. Back to the main text. The development of money into a medium of payment makes it necessary to accumulate money against the dates fixed for the payment of the sums owing, while hoarding, as a distinct mode of acquiring riches, vanishes with the progress of civil society. The formation of reserves of the means of payment grows with that progress. C. Universal money. When money leaves the home sphere of circulation, it strips off the local garbs which it there assumes of a standard of prices, of coin, of tokens, and of a symbol of value, and returns to its original form of bullion. In the trade between the markets of the world, the value of commodities is expressed so as to be universally recognized. Hence their independent value form also, in these cases, confronts them under the shape of universal money. It is only in the markets of the world that money acquires to the full extent the character of the commodity whose bodily form is also the immediate social incarnation of human labor in the abstract. Its real mode of existence in this sphere adequately corresponds to its ideal concept. Within the sphere of home circulation, there can be but one commodity, which, by serving as a measure of value, becomes money. In the markets of the world, a double measure of value holds sway, gold and silver. Footnote here, hence the absurdity of every law prescribing that the banks of a country shall form reserves of that precious metal alone which circulates at home. The, quote, pleasant difficulties thus self-created by the Bank of England are well known. On the subject of the great epochs in the history of the changes in the relative value of gold and silver, see Marx's contribution to the critique of political economy. Sir Robert Peel, by his Bank Act of 1844, sought to tide over the difficulty by allowing the Bank of England to issue notes against silver bullion, on condition that the reserve of silver should never exceed more than 1/4 of the reserve of gold, the value of silver being for that purpose estimated at its price in the London market. There's also a note here about an addition that was made to the 4th German edition. We find ourselves once more in a period of serious change in the relative values of gold and silver. About 25 years ago, the ratio expressing the relative value of gold and silver was 15.5 to 1. Now it is approximately 22 to 1, and silver is still constantly falling as against gold. This is essentially the result of a revolution in the mode of production of both metals. Formerly, gold was obtained almost exclusively by washing it out from gold-bearing alluvial deposits, products of the weathering of auriferous rocks. Now this method has become inadequate, and has been forced into the background by the processing of the quartz lodes themselves, a way of extraction which formerly was only of secondary importance, although well known to the ancients. Moreover, not only were new huge silver deposits discovered in North America, in the western part of the Rocky Mountains, but these and the Mexican silver mines were really opened up by the laying of railways, which made possible the shipment of modern machinery and fuel, and in consequence the mining of silver on a very large scale at a low cost. However, there is a great difference in the way the two metals occur in the quartz lodes. The gold is mostly native, but disseminated throughout the quartz in minute quantities. The whole mass of the vein must therefore be crushed, and the gold either washed out or extracted by means of mercury. Often 1 million grams of quartz barely yield 1 to 3, and very seldom 30 to 60 grams of gold. Silver is seldom found native. However, it occurs in special quartz that is separated from the lode with comparative ease and contains mostly 40 to 90% silver, or it is contained in smaller quantities in copper, lead, and other ores which in themselves are worthwhile working. From this alone, it is apparent that the labor expended on the production of gold is rather increasing, while that expended on silver production has decidedly decreased, which quite naturally explains the drop in the value of the latter. This fall in value would express itself in a still greater fall in price if the price of silver were not pegged even today by artificial means. But America's rich silver deposits have so far barely been tapped, and thus the prospects are that the value of this metal will keep on dropping for rather a long time to come. A still greater contributing factor here is the relative decrease in the requirement of silver for articles of general use and for luxuries, that is, its replacement by plated goods, aluminum, etc. One may thus gauge the utopianism of the bimetallist idea that compulsory international quotation will raise silver again to the old value ratio of 1 to 15.5. It is more likely that silver will forfeit its money function more and more in the markets of the world. That was a footnote from Engels. Back to the main text. Money of the world serves as the universal medium of payment, as the universal means of purchasing, and as the universally recognized embodiment of all wealth. Its function as a means of payment in the settling of international balances is its chief one. Hence the watchword of the mercantilists, balance of trade. Footnote here, the opponents themselves of the mercantile system, a system which considered the settlement of surplus trade balances in gold and silver as the aim of international trade, entirely misconceived the function of money of the world. I have shown by the example of Ricardo in what way their false conception of the laws that regulate the quantity of the circulating medium is reflected in their equally false conception of the international movement of the precious metals. His erroneous dogma, quote, an unfavorable balance of trade never arises but from a redundant currency. The exportation of the coin is caused by its cheapness and is not the effect, but the cause of an unfavorable balance, unquote, already occurs in Barbon. Quote, the balance of trade, if there be one, is not the cause of sending away the money out of a nation, but that proceeds from the difference of the value of bullion in every country, unquote. McCullough, in The Literature of Political Economy, a classified catalog, 1845, praises Barbon for this anticipation, but prudently passes over the naive forms in which Barbon clothes the absurd supposition on which the, quote, currency principle is based. The absence of real criticism, and even of honesty, in that catalog culminates in the sections devoted to the history of the theory of money. The reason is that McCullough, in this part of the work, is flattering Lord Overstone, whom he calls facile princeps argentinorum, translatable to easily the leader of the silver people, or financiers. Back to the main text. Gold and silver serve as international means of purchasing chiefly and necessarily in those periods when the customary equilibrium in the interchange of products between different nations is suddenly disturbed. And lastly, it serves as the universally recognized embodiment of social wealth, whenever the question is not of buying or paying but of transferring wealth from one country to another, and whenever this transference in the form of commodities is rendered impossible, either by special conjunctures in the markets or by the purpose itself that is intended. Footnote here, for instance, in subsidies, money loans for carrying on wars, or for enabling banks to resume cash payments, etc., it is the money form and no other of value that may be wanted. Back to the main text. Just as every country needs a reserve of money for its home circulation, so too it requires one for external circulation in the markets of the world. The functions of hoards, therefore, arise in part out of the function of money, as the medium of the home circulation and home payments, and in part out of its function of money of the world. Footnote here, quoting Fullerton, I would desire indeed no more convincing evidence of the competency of the machinery of the hoards in specie-paying countries to perform every necessary office of international adjustment without any sensible aid from the general circulation, than the facility with which France, when but just recovering from the shock of a destructive foreign invasion, completed within the space of 27 months the payment of her forced contribution of nearly 20 millions to the Allied powers, and a considerable proportion of the sum in specie without any perceptible contraction or derangement of her domestic currency, or even any alarming fluctuation of her exchanges." Unquote. And added by Engels in the 4th German edition, we have a still more striking example in the facility with which the same France was able in 1871 to 73 to pay off within 30 months a forced contribution more than 10 times as great, a considerable part of it likewise in specie. Back to the main text. For this latter function, the genuine money commodity, actual gold and silver, is necessary. On that account, Sir James Stewart, in order to distinguish them from their purely local substitutes, calls gold and silver money of the world. The current of the stream of gold and silver is a double one. On the one hand, it spreads itself from its sources all over the markets of the world, in order to become absorbed to various extents into the different national spheres of circulation, to fill the conduits of currency, to replace abraded gold and silver coins, to supply the material of articles of luxury, and to petrify into hoards. Footnote here, quoting from La Trosna, "Money is shared among the nations in accordance with their need for it, as it is always attracted by the products." And quoting Vanderlant, "The mines which are continually giving gold and silver do give sufficient to supply such a needful balance to every nation." Back to the main text. This first current is started by the countries that exchanged their labor, realized in commodities, for the labor embodied in the precious metals by gold and silver producing countries. On the other hand, there is a continual flowing backwards and forwards of gold and silver between the different national spheres of circulation, a current whose motion depends on the ceaseless fluctuations in the course of exchange. Footnote here, quoting Barbon, "Exchanges rise and fall every week, and at some particular times in the year run high against a nation, and at other times run as high on the contrary." Back to the main text. Countries in which the bourgeois form of production is developed to a certain extent limit the hoards concentrated in the strong rooms of the banks to the minimum required for the proper performance of their peculiar functions. Footnote here, these various functions are liable to come into dangerous conflict with one another whenever gold and silver have also to serve as a fund for the conversion of banknotes. Back to the main text. Whenever these hoards are strikingly above their average level, it is, with some exceptions, an indication of stagnation in the circulation of commodities, of an interruption in the even flow of their metamorphoses. Footnote here, quoting John Bellers, "What money is more than of absolute necessity for a home trade is dead stock, and brings no profit to that country it's kept in, but as it is transported in trade as well as imported." And quoting William Petty's Quantulum Cunque, "What if we have too much coin? We may melt down the heaviest and turn it into the splendor of plate, vessels, or utensils of gold or silver, or send it out as a commodity where the same is wanted or desired, or let it out at interest where interest is high." And again quoting Petty, this time from Political Anatomy of Ireland, "Money is but the fat of the body politic, whereof too much doth as often hinder its agility as too little makes it sick, as fat lubricates the motion of the muscles, feeds in want of victuals, fills up the uneven cavities, and beautifies the body. So doth money in the state quicken its action, feeds from abroad in time of dearth at home, even accounts and beautifies the whole, although more especially the particular persons that have it in plenty." And that is the end of Chapter 3. Thanks for listening. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below. I know that I didn't do as much commenting on this chapter as I often do. One reason for that is I haven't been hearing from people in the comments as much, so I'm not sure what people might be struggling with, so be sure to do that if you do have any questions. I know also the view counts on these later chapters are much lower. Right now, the prefaces in Chapter 1 have about 3,000 views each, but the later sections of Chapter 3 have more like 300 views. So I know a lot of people are just not there yet because they haven't done the earlier sections, or they haven't followed up with the later sections if they have done the earlier. I know that that's just the case whenever I post things in chapters rather than as the whole, but I will be posting the link to the whole playlist so that people can get caught up and catch up to these later chapters. It is important. This is a really critical reading. It's very long, but it's also important to go through the mechanics of capitalism, how it works, and what its vulnerabilities are. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall, or you can make a one-time or recurring contribution also on buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. Every donation is encouraging, they're also materially helpful, and they allow me to spend more time on this channel than I'd be able to do without those contributions. So thank you very much for those. Also, engagement counts, so like, share, and subscribe. And remember, the point of doing these studies is to win the class struggle. So take what you've learned here and apply it in your local left. Connect with the organizations around you, network with comrades, and help to intensify the class struggle where you live. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.